Hi, welcome to Digging for Truth, where we explore the archaeology and lands of the Bible. I'm your host, Henry Smith. Today, archaeologist Titus Kennedy joins us as we explore selected archaeological sites in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Persia, and we'll be walking through Titus's new book as we do so. Titus, welcome back to Digging for Truth. It's good to see you, brother.
Thank you, Henry. It's good to be back.
All right, good to see you again. We're very pleased to have you back on the show. You've been on numerous times to share with us about the wonderful world of archaeology in the Bible. And you are turning out to be quite a prolific author, my friend. We're here today to sort of survey your new book, The Essential Archaeological Guide to Bible Land. So we're going on a sort of geographic journey. I guess I should ask you first, Titus, what were some of your thoughts in putting this book together? Sort of the idea behind it. Obviously, you must have thought about it a lot because there's a lot of stuff in there.
Sure, there were a few factors. So I previously wrote a book that addressed just artifacts connected to the Bible. So I was thinking along the lines of what about places, locations? And as I was looking into books that addressed locations in the Bible, archaeological sites in the Bible, I noticed that many of them were quite out of date. A lot had been written, say, 70s, 80s, and 90s. But then the second thing was I noticed that most of them tended to only address sites in the Holy Land. And so you had sites in Mesopotamia and Egypt, Anatolia, even Greece and Rome to some degree that were often left out of these books and largely ignored. So I wanted to pull in all the different areas of the Bible lands, give updates for new discoveries and new analyses, and then also to throw in some sites that maybe hadn't even been addressed in some of the older books.
Yeah, I appreciated that about the book. It was nice to see updated material. I probably have some of those older references on my shelf, and you use them, and then, you have to. Archaeology is tough because you always got to keep up with all the new changes that are taking place and the different perspectives. All right, so we're going to parachute ourselves down into southern Mesopotamia as our starting point, and one of the most intriguing parts for me personally was this part of Mesopotamia and early history of Genesis. Let's talk about Genesis 10:10 and a city that's in the Hebrew Bible or in our English translations, it's Erech, but this is easily connected with a very old city there. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so in your English translations, it looks like Erech, but this is the city of Uruk. It's equivalent in Hebrew. Just for whatever reason, it was rendered differently when translations were made. And Uruk is a very famous city in terms of Mesopotamian history and archaeology. It's often referred to as the first city. So it's one of these earliest settlements or city settlements that are found in the world in southern Mesopotamia. And so I find it really significant, not only being one of the earliest cities, but it is mentioned there in Genesis 10 as one of the first cities. The beginning of his kingdom, it says, was Babel, Uruk, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar, which is Sumer. So we have a really nice corroboration here between what Genesis is talking about in the earliest cities and then what we find archaeologically and in Mesopotamian history.
Yeah, one of the fascinating things about this is, of course, it's being mentioned very early in the post-flood period. The claim that Genesis sort of was written in the post-exilic period or put together in the post-exilic period. And so much of this material that you reference here is so early. These cities not only came into being, but went out of usage and were buried in the sands of time long before that later period of the Bible, showing how ancient these references are in Holy Scripture.
Absolutely. I think one of the other really interesting things about Uruk is that this is the site where the earliest writing basically appears. And it's all in this region, but usually it's attributed to Uruk. So what happens when new civilization gets established after the flood and writing pops up here in this first city, as it's often referred to? and then it disseminates from there. And I think that is also an important marker in just showing how southern Mesopotamia, Sumer, was the rebirth of civilization. And this is exactly what we would expect if we're looking at Genesis 10 from a historical perspective.
Yeah, it's really good. The Table of Nations in particular giving us how that's all outlined in the story of Nimrod, of course. Okay, so we have another connection to the early reference here. You reference in your book of the Kushim from Uruk. So let's talk about Kushim, or Kish maybe is the another way of pronouncing that. Tell us about that, Titus, if you would.
Well, this is either a name or a title that appears on at least 18 tablets that were found at Uruk. And so they associate this person or this title, Kushim, with the city of Uruk. And of course, we have this person in Genesis 10:8, Cush, the father of Nimrod, who then has this kingdom that includes cities like Uruk. And so either we have just a very interesting coincidence here, or there's some connection between the name Cush and this name or title Kushim at Uruk. Again, I think this speaks to the antiquity of what's going on there in Genesis 10.
Yeah, and we should know that Cush, as you often spell with a C, son of Ham, and as you mentioned, father of Nimrod. So we're talking about very early in the post-flood period. Now, in the same region, we also have the city of Ur, which is where Abraham came out of. So if you would, give us a little tutorial on Ur, and then we'll pick up on that on the other side.
Well, Ur is, at least in the Bible, we see it called Ur of the Chaldees. So there's more than one Ur in the ancient world, but this is the most famous one. Massive excavations were done there, incredible discoveries. So this is a place that's located in southern Mesopotamia, which later gets known as Chaldea or Babylonia. And this is about 10 miles west of the Euphrates River, fairly near to Baghdad and the Persian Gulf. And this city is, of course, where we find Abraham coming about. This is the beginning of the story of Abraham. Yet this city traces far back in time before him, and by the time of Abraham's life, it's one of the largest and most powerful cities in the ancient world. And thankfully, there have been fairly extensive excavations there, so we know quite a bit about this city.
Excellent. Well, we'll pick up more on that, Titus, after this break, and we'll be right back.
Bible in Spade is a non-technical quarterly publication published by the Associates for Biblical Research. Written from a scholarly and conservative viewpoint, Bible in Spade supports the inerrancy of the biblical record and is a must-read for both the serious Bible student and anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible. Archaeological evidence, properly interpreted, upholding the history of the Bible. Subscribe today at BibleArchaeology.org.
Hi, I'm Henry Smith. Welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm here with Titus Kennedy. We're talking about his new book. We're taking a journey through Bible lands. Now, Titus, we're still in Mesopotamia. We were talking about Abraham. Something interesting that you point to in the book is evidence for human sacrifice at Ur. Tell us about this, because this is quite early in the archaeological record.
Yeah, so at Ur, we have some of the earliest examples of a type of human sacrifice. This is sometimes called servant sacrifice or retainer sacrifice. And that's because it's not taking a person to an altar and sacrificing them to a god, one by one or in groups. This is when a king gets buried and then they execute or sacrifice many of his servants or retainers, and they put them into the tomb with him at the time of burial. And so we see this in multiple tombs at Ur. In fact, the really famous one is called the Great Death Pit, because there were so many people who were found in there, at least 164. And we find this, though, only in the early times of Mesopotamia. This practice seems to go out of use. But there is another early connection here, because this same type of retainer or servant sacrifice is also found in the earliest periods of Egypt. But then, like Mesopotamia, it goes away and they stop the practice.
Oh, that's very interesting. Almost as if the idea got dispersed, maybe because of Babel, perhaps something along those lines, a common practice. But it does show you how quickly in the post-flood world people drifted very quickly back into egregious sins. The world was filled with violence before the flood. Here's an example of a different form of human sacrifice, different than later, but still gruesome nonetheless. But part of the human history, and very consistent with the Bible. Now, another subject that you bring up here that I was unaware of this has to do with Abraham's name change. Titus, tell us a little about how that might connect to his background.
So his original name is Abram, which, by the way, is attested on some tablets found from nearby Ur, right at the time of Abraham, right around 2000 BC or so. And so this was a name that was used then, and it seems to be a name that is connected to the primary god worshipped in this region. So the name means the Father is exalted, and it seems to be connected to the moon god Sin, or Nana, and yet we see then Abraham's name is changed, and it doesn't look so much different in English, but the meaning is drastically different. It goes from the Father is exalted, probably a pagan reference, to Father of a multitude, which we see connects to what is related to the divine promise that Abraham would in the future have many descendants. So slight change of the sound of the name, but drastically changed in its meaning.
Yeah, that's remarkable. God changes his name, but also in that context, he's changing the whole purpose of his life, the whole meaning of his life, his whole entire worldview, and that is represented in that. I found that fascinating, and the fact that, because for decades or even a couple centuries, people have also been saying, these accounts of the patriarchs, they're anachronistic, they were written much later, and now you're saying that we've got some tablets with Abram's original name on it. It's just really incredible stuff. Okay, but I don't want to comment too much on that, Titus, because I want you to talk about the city that they stopped at before they got to Canaan, and eventually Abraham's father, Terah, dies there. Tell us about that city, where it is, and what we know about it.
Well, that city is Haran, and that is in northern Mesopotamia. So they go north, following the rivers before they turn to the west, and he eventually crosses south into Canaan. So Haran is another one of these ancient cities, although it wasn't to the same level as a place like Ur or Nineveh or Babylon. But I think one really important thing about Haran is that there is this ancient pagan connection between Ur and Haran, because at Haran, it was also a center of worship of the moon god Sin. So if Abraham, or Abraham's father, is very connected or very typical in worshiping this moon god, then it would make sense that he would want to go north to another city that shares the same culture and ideology. Of course, it wasn't Abraham's choice to go to Haran, and Abraham doesn't stay there. He leaves eventually, but it was his father's choice.
Yeah, it's a very interesting part of that account, and of course Joshua alludes to this, that your fathers worshipped, gods beyond the rivers, or beyond the river. That's the reference that's being made there, and really, really fascinating stuff. Well, that's just scratching the surface, Titus, in your book on Mesopotamia. We do want to encourage people to pick up a copy of it. You mentioned Egypt, and so now we're gonna jump across the Arabian desert and go all the way down to Egypt. Gonna take a sort of a jet down there. Let's parachute into one of our favorite sites that we've talked about too before, and that is Ramses. If you could give us a minute or so tutorial on that, and then we'll pick up again on the other side.
Well, Ramses was one of the largest cities of the ancient world. So we see a lot of these major cities talked about in Genesis and Exodus. But Ramses is located in the northeastern Nile Delta. The Bible calls this area Goshen, which is also a term that's found in New Kingdom Egyptian texts. So the Bible wasn't just making up that kind of terminology. Ramses is a name that's connected to the sun god Ra, who was one of the major gods of Egypt. And the sun god was the preeminent god in the north, whereas you had other gods like Ptah and then Amun in the center and south. So Ramses it's a little bit confusing sometimes because there's sort of two cities or one earlier city that then got expanded upon, but your viewers may be familiar with Avaris. So that was one of the earlier names for the city that was in this region. It was the one that was ruled by the Hyksos at one point, although it goes back earlier than them. But then there's this expansion of the city, and most people are familiar with the name Ramses connected to the expansion of the city and a palace named Pi-Ramessu that was connected to Seti I and Ramses II. Well, in the Bible, this is extremely important because Ramses is the name of one of the store cities where the Israelites were forced into slave labor to build. And then it's also the place where they depart from in the Exodus and seems to be where Moses is encountering the Pharaoh in his discussions during the plagues.
Excellent. Well, we're going to pick up more with that with Dr. Titus Kennedy right after this break.
In a culture of intense Bible-denying skepticism, Associates for Biblical Research exists to strengthen followers of Jesus by affirming the authority of the Bible. Our archaeological fieldwork and original research form a strong foundation in upholding the reliability of the Scriptures. For students or anyone asking if they can really trust the Bible, please visit our website and partner with us by joining our prayer team or financially supporting this ministry. And thank you for standing with us.
Hi, welcome back to Digging for Truth. I'm here with Dr. Titus Kennedy, and we're going on a geographical journey through Scripture and talking about Titus's new book, The Essential Archaeological Guide to Bible Lands. We encourage you to pick up a copy of that wherever books are sold. Okay, my friend, we were in Egypt talking about Ramses, the earlier name Avaris. It's in the Delta. One of my favorite discoveries there that you talk about is this giant statue of this quote-unquote Asiatic official. Tell us about this and who you think the identification might be.
So there are two similar statues, but the main one that people discuss was about 2 meters tall. So like you said, massive statue. And this is really interesting because fragments of this statue were found scattered around the site in numerous tombs, for instance. But it seems to have come from a place called the Egyptianized Asiatic Residence. So this was some sort of governmental building from either the 12th dynasty or the early 13th dynasty there in Avaris, Ramses. And we know that this person was not just an Egyptian official because of the way that the statue is shaped and the paint. So he had the mushroom-shaped hairstyle, which is typical for Asiatics or depicting Asiatics. He was holding a shepherd's crook in his right hand, and then he had paint on the cloak in red, white, and black at least. So it's kind of the multicolored tunic type of thing that we see described with Joseph, and also on that wall painting in the tomb of Khnumhotep II, showing the Asiatics migrating there into Egypt around the time of Abraham or Jacob. So this is a really great example, I think, to demonstrate how in this earlier period, around the time of Jacob and Joseph, that it makes sense that someone like Joseph could have been elevated up to the status of vizier, because later on we see that Semites are enslaved. the time of Moses and even before that.
Right.
But in the time of Joseph, there's not that same animosity or policy of widespread slavery. And so this fits the historical context very, very well.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, I know some I believe that the statue is actually a statue of Joseph. I think some others have argued possibly Jacob. But even if you don't make that identification, just the accuracy of the biblical text in its time period shows what we talked about before, Genesis being written centuries later. No way, this is eyewitness testimony to very particular cultural practices and context. Titus, you do a great job of drawing that out in your book. Now, in the previous segment, you mentioned the store cities. Let's talk about those a little bit. Tell us about the store cities from Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 through 11.
So these are some kind of, probably not actually whole cities, but sectors of cities where they are building facilities for storage. And we see in the excavations, both at Tel El Daba, which is Avaris and later Ramses, and at the excavations in what many now would identify as Pithom, which is Tel Rataba, we see massive storage facilities were built in the early 18th dynasty, which would be the time of Moses prior to the Exodus. And so there are these big, huge silos. They're round, built out of mud brick, and they were used to store grain and other things. So we do see the building of massive storage facilities at Ramses and Pithom, which Exodus 1:11 specifies. If we look at the Septuagint, it adds in there Heliopolis, and we do know that there was building at Heliopolis just prior to the Exodus. For example, Hatshepsut and also especially Thutmose III had building projects there as well. So all that kind of stuff, even down to the specifics of storage facilities, we see reflected in the archaeological record.
Yeah, it's good. That's a good tutorial. You mentioned Heliopolis. When folks really should pick up a copy of the book because you talk about Memphis, Thebes, the Sinai, and you traveled to Sudan to get pictures and study the Soleb inscription, which mentions the name Yahweh. Now, Titus, I hate to do this, but we want to move to Persia now, and we're not going to do justice to any of these sites, but let's talk a little bit about Persia. You cover it again. Just one area we want to talk about is the early period. What do we know about, you mentioned a connection on page 66 to the Elamites, Genesis 10:22. Tell us a little bit about that.
So we see some of the earliest people after Noah's sons. One of them's named Elam, so he's the father of the Elamites. Well, over in Persia, particularly Susa, the city of Susa, we have these Elamites starting their own civilization, essentially. So the city of Susa, we know it was established even before 3000 BC by these Elamites, these sons of Elam. And that, again, fits very well with what we see in Genesis 10 and the Table of Nations. People are going out from southern Mesopotamia, and they are establishing new cultures, new cities, new civilizations. And Susa attests to that with the Elamites. Another interesting thing we see about the Elamites is that they have a very early writing system as well. It doesn't seem to come about quite as early as we see in Uruk, but they start to use writing there about 3000 BC also, and it's a little bit different. So these different regions are developing their own unique writing systems. They share some similarities, but they are not directly equivalent.
Yeah, that would seem to fit very nicely with the Babel narrative. Elam is right next to southern Mesopotamia there, Samaria. So really fascinating. Well, believe it or not, Titus, we've run out of time, but you are going to come back to talk about the region of Turkey, Anatolia, Greece, Rome, and even a little bit of Israel, and we're looking forward to it. Thanks for being here, and looking forward to having you back.
Okay, my pleasure.
All right, friends, thank you for watching Digging for Truth. We want to encourage you to pick up a copy of Titus's excellent book and read through that. It's got a lot of great discoveries in it. We've just done just a brief survey here today, but we hope that you would appreciate that and hopefully pick up a copy. We thank you for watching Digging for Truth, and we'll see you next time.
Digging for Truth is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.